So we can understand lawlessness in light of other words like iniquity, transgression, treason. So we live our lives treasonous. And treason has become a nature that it almost doesn't mean anything. It's almost like one would say, it becomes light. How vexing is the nature of sin and disobedience to the very essence of God. That if you are driving, that is, I think R.C. Sproul said this. If you're driving, how did he put it? 40 miles an hour on a 35 miles an hour road. Is that disobedience? Is that the problem? And I think in a sense he was trying to spark our consciousness to the effect and to the magnitude of treason. And we see it in effect when one is treasonous to a secular state or government. But before we plumb the depths of that word even more, let's look at some definitions. I think they help. Lawlessness. I think I should have written that anarchy, lawless. Iniquity. That's right. And these are all things that they are all perspective to give a fuller picture of the world. So it refers to a state or condition that is characterized by a lack of adherence to laws. Where we become mavericks to break the boundaries and explore the fringes. And iniquity can be seen in light of an immoral behavior. And that is characterized by a lack of justice and righteousness or moral principles. A violation of what is considered to be morally right. And another word that we find here, transgression. The act of violating the law. And we see how all these things come together when we betray a sovereign, and when we engage in hostile activities to undermine the authority of a government, or to seek to overthrow the government. And I think I have this poem, I memorized it some time ago, and I like him a lot, Friedrich Nietzsche, as he becomes my favorite secular prophet, because he seems to understand what he's talking about. And he popularized the word, I think in his book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the madman. And if you will, I think it makes sense to, I can't quote it verbatim anymore, but it would be nice to have that quoted. But what he talked about is that a madman lit a candles in the night time, and there were a bunch of people standing around, and he jumped into their midst with piercing eyes and screaming, "God is dead! God is dead! We have killed him! Don't you see it? You and I, we have become his murderers." And then the people joked. They don't know what he's talking about, what he was talking about. And he said, you and I are his murderers. We have killed God. We have done it ourselves. And we still don't know the magnitude of what we have done. We have become God's undertakers. God has bled from his throne by the sharpness of our knowledge, the sharpness of our philosophies. Then Nietzsche begins to ask the question. The madman says, "What sacred games shall we now invent? With what sponge have we wiped away the horizon? Where are we now straying? Up, down, left, right? Is there any, how did he put it? We are straying through an infinite nothingness. Who has unchained this earth from his anchor? So these are deep questions that Nietzsche is conjuring. To overthrow the government of God. So the Enlightenment period, which we call the Enlightenment, is just men coming to a point to say, away with the laws that have governed society, that has flown from God's moral laws throughout the centuries, that stops us from enjoying ourselves. And that is why you would see a man who was engaged in all sorts of vices. The vice of debauchery, the vice of wantonness, and avarice, and amassing in the material. But when a man has reached the peak of pleasure and has achieved everything that one can have, they put a gun to the head and blow it away. The core of the soul is God. So we live in violation of the essence of our creature. Something is wrong and it doesn't make sense. So Nietzsche is talking about the death of God. And he said, why do we need to live as if there is a God? We must embrace the nihil. We must embrace the emptiness. The empty space. And really we do see today that the modern man has chosen to embrace the empty space. And we see the effect in our culture. The outbreak of mental health crisis. The outbreak of depression. The outbreak of suicide. The complete breakdown of any moral code. We've gone into the age of degeneracy. And we are walking according to the impulse of the treasonous path that we have chosen. Fixed in sin. And this is what the ancients called original sin. The effect of what happened in the garden that has underscored the entirety. But thank God, not all, because there is hope of human existence. Locked into this nature, become fixed like God. Because the knowledge of does not give the power of. And I see a celebration of the treasonous path. I like what Friedrich Nietzsche again, in an excerpt from his work in The Joyful Signs or The Gay Signs, written in 1882, he says, we have left the land and have embarked. And that can be the anthem song of the current situation of humanity today. A complete and total hatred for God. And a love for anything that is not God. A love for everything God hates. And a hatred for everything God loves. We have left the land behind us and we have embarked. We have burned our bridges behind. We have burned the bridges behind us. Indeed, we have gone farther and destroyed the land behind us. Now, little sheep, look out. Beside you is the ocean. To be sure, it does not always roar. And at times, it lies spread out like silk and gold and reveries of graciousness. But hours will come when you will realize that it is infinite and that there is nothing more awesome than infinity. Oh, the poor bird that felt free and now strikes the walls of the cage. Woe when you feel homesick for the land as if it has offered more freedom and there is no longer any land. Now, Nietzsche is very interested in his write-up. Talked about the infiniteness, and there's nothing more awesome than infinity, because he seemed to understand. His writings, especially in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, are very piercing. He seems to understand the implication of living without God. Yet chooses to embrace it. And even he himself ultimately succumbed and died from insanity. So the poor bird that felt free now strikes the wall of its cage, of this cage. So the lawlessness offers freedom. The order set by God was too restrictive. You shall not surely die. God has set the world in boundaries. As Nietzsche said, in the land behind us. But there is a desire to somehow come into deity in a sense. And this is what we see in the tumbling and rumbling of the human condition. Day and night, meaninglessness into meaninglessness. Nothing into nothing. More money, more wealth, more power, more prestige, more pleasures, and then it all ends. And then at every person's funeral, there's always a nice eulogy. But from a meaningless beginning, that results in a meaningless present and a meaningless outcome. So the only way to strive in the nihil is for we as gods to create meaning for ourselves. So we are the plumb lines. We are the rules. We can now define truth. And I make my own truth. We can define our sexuality. We can define genders. We can redefine marriage. We can redefine anything. We become masters of our own destiny. Captains of our own ship. But how can you rule? How can you understand? Not to talk of rule, what you did not create. The famous quote by R.C. Sproul is that sin is nothing more than cosmic treason. And the penalty for treason, I think in most parts of the world that has eliminated capital punishment, still has death as a penalty for treason. And the penalty for cosmic treason is death. God said, "Ye shall surely die." So sin is both a debt. You could look at it as I will put that over here. And it creates enmity, conflict with God. And that's what happened when God said in Genesis chapter 3 verse 15, when he was laying out the curse. He says, "I will put enmity to the serpent between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed." And that enmity refers to a state of mutual hostility. So sin is an expression of enmity and an expression of enmity against God, hostility, hostile towards the law of God. But I would read from the book of Psalms chapter 36. An oracle is in my heart regarding the transgression of the wicked man. There is no fear of God before his eyes, for his eyes are too full of conceit to detect or hate his own sin. The words of his mouth are wicked and deceitful. He has ceased to be wise and well-being. So the loss of wisdom, and the loss of wisdom or foolishness is depicted as the wisdom that comes from sin. The wisdom to destroy another. The wisdom to put down and to gather towards oneself. And this is the wisdom for wars and to create inventions of destructions, weapons of mass destructions. Mass destructions of nations, mass destructions of systems, mass destruction of culture, and mass destruction of the soul. The words of his mouth are wicked and deceitful. He has ceased to be wise and well-being. Even on his bed he plots wickedness. He sets himself on a path that is not good. He fails to reject evil. But your loving devotion, O Lord, reaches to the heavens. Your faithfulness to the clouds. Your righteousness is like the highest mountains. Your judgments are like the deepest sea. O Lord, you preserve man and beast. How precious is your loving devotion, O God, that the children of men take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house, and you give them drink from your river of delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light, we see light. And we talked about God being the source of all light that shines in the darkness. That is the light of creation and is the light of our beingness. So extend your loving devotion to those who know you, and your righteousness to the upright in heart. Every man has as in a sense, we all have elements of a common delusion, and that is a delusion of grandeur. We have a higher than life image of ourselves. So every man on the street will admit that they are good people. They are good men. But by what standard and on what basis? By basis of your own nature? That is treasonous. And it is this delusion of grandeur that prevents us from coming to full knowledge of the gravity of our sinfulness and the stench and odiousness of that act is ever lighter and increasingly lighter. We create subtly, create standards for ourselves. Even among those who perhaps are participants in this reconciliation package. But we are 40% secular humanists because we create our own standard. Still controlling the rule, still controlling the plumb line, still controlling the measure. By what standard? You are good by what standard? By the standard of your neighbor? or by the standard of the man out there who took a gun into an elementary school and committed acts of violence and wickedness. So this delusion persists, righteous in our own eyes, minimizing the gravity of the act. And he just said in his poem, The Madman, my time has not come. This action is too heavy, and even they who have committed it cannot see it, but it's coming. The impact of this is coming. And William B. Yeats talks about that man slouching towards Bethlehem. But there's a package for reconciliation at Bethlehem. But the delusion persists. What is the weight of a gossip? What is the weight of a white lie? Do we not fully understand what has happened here? Complete contempt for divine government. So we ought not trust in ourselves and trust in our own goodness. For a man, for a creature cannot give moral laws and moral rules. Let's even talk about laws and rules for a moment. For a law to be objectively held for an external participant, it has to come from a power that is higher than oneself. That means person A cannot create a law that holds objectively for person B, C, and D. For that law to be equally objective for A, B, C, D, it must come from a power that is higher than all of them. So by what measure do we create laws for ourselves and expect those laws to be objective laws? There is a let not the foot, verse 11, of the proud come against me, nor the hand of the wicked drive me away. There the evildoers lie fallen, thrown down, and unable to rise. So this is the very heart and the very nature of evil, etched in the act of treason. So even when a treasonous man does good again, by what standard? Well, let's assume that by a general standard of goodness, which we can all agree, say buy candy for a baby. We all know that is very good and noble to do. But when it comes from a heart of treason, it is altogether evil and altogether wicked. Because it doesn't come from the righteousness of God who sets the standard. But there is hope as we wrap up. In the book of Zechariah chapter 1 from verse 3, in verse 3, it says, therefore, The word of the Lord came to Zechariah in verse 1 and says, say unto them, thus says the Lord of hosts, turn ye unto me, and I will turn unto you. And we will explore a little bit more about the pathway to reconciliation with our Maker. How can man become whole? How can we solve the breach? How can we close the gap and come into oneness with God, and what it means in terms of a practical living in the way that God has originally designed. As we wrap up, we always tend to wrap up our teachings with the word that we've come to know and love, and that is called doxology. Turning our gaze on heaven to worship God. And as we wrap up with the note of worship, God defines the boundaries. God defines the rule. God sets the plumb line. And He is the anchor of the soul. Man setting the rule is an adoption, or in this way, in a sense, it is an adoption of the path, an adoption of the path that has been set by the enemy, by Satan, the thief that cometh to steal, to kill and destroy, that always hates and always usurps the order of God. But yet is the catch. The Creator is not an equal. There is no force or creature that is an equal and opposite force, power with the Creator. So in all of his schemes, Satan is not an equal and opposite force with God. So there is no yin and yang here. That whole philosophy and every other worldview collapses on their own weight. You cannot make this up. And man is not an equal, consequently not an equal and opposite force with God. God rules and He defines. But He has given us this day and night, this time continuum, by which we can express our fidelity to God in light of the reconciliation package. So there is hope. So there is something about this lifetime, something about being alive in the flesh, for which we can participate in what E.G. White calls the great controversy. But we begin by stepping down from this great delusion. For people who believe a lie, God sends to them strong delusions. And then we can begin to walk our way back to fruitfulness. And I trust that you join us again in the second part of this teaching tomorrow. We will begin to explore what this reconciliation package is about and how God can bring help to the rebels. There is no other worldview in the world, no other religious expression or worldview, even the worldview of no religion, where their adherents or where God, in a sense, let me rephrase it a different way. Every religion of the world, you somehow have to do something. The rebels have to decide to come and drop their arms, either by repeating the chakras or by going on certain pilgrimages or giving up arms. The rebels drop their arms. The rebels try to renegotiate their way back to their deities, which are altogether false. But you cannot renegotiate your way back to your maker. So God in his majestic opulence creates a path for the rebels. He comes to you. So we see how excellent is their loving kindness, O God. Therefore the children of men put their trust under the shadow of your wings. And they shall be abundantly satisfied with the fatness of your house. So he comes to you to fill the broken soul with his loving kindness. And where the wounded spirit can find their peace in the shadow of his wings. I want to explore more about this when we meet next time.